For the past couple of days, the Genshin community has been up in arms. There's been arguments after arguments, conversation after conversation about practically every single aspect of Genshin Impact. The characters, the narratives, the cultural representation, the clothing, you name it, people have been arguing about it. And the catalyst for all of this was one YouTube video. A video titled, "Was Genshin Always This Weird and Bad?" And even though it was made by a relatively new creator by the name of Candybbug, it has already amassed almost 400,000 views by the time I'm making this video. That is how highly controversial this video has been. Now here's the thing, the original video is 55 minutes long, which means reacting to it in its entirety would take probably 2 to 3 hours. And while that could be entertaining in its own right, that is a little too much. Luckily for us though, she uploaded a follow-up video, an apology video, but more importantly to the context of what we're making. It is a video where she already isolates the points from the original video that sparked the most controversy. So in this video, we're going to examine those specific points, analyze what she actually said in the original video, and ask a very important question. Is she really as bad as the Genshin community is making her out to be? Are the things she said really so outrageous, so objectively wrong, that they justify every ounce of criticism or the vitriol that she's receiving right now? Or is there some nuance here? That's what we're going to talk about in this video. Now, before we continue, I think it is important to make one thing very clear. I do not know this creator. I have never spoken to her. This video is simply me involving myself in a discussion that is already happening within the community. So it goes without saying that whatever praise or criticism comes from this video should be directed at me and me alone. So with that being said, if you're into this kind of content, make sure to like the video and let me know your thoughts in the comments below. What side of the discussion do you lean towards? Do you agree more with the points made by the creator? Do you think there is nuance that people are overlooking, or do you side with the community's rebuttals? Do you think the level of anger we're seeing right now is justified? Let me know in the comments below, and of course don't forget to subscribe if you want to on any of my future videos. Alright, let's get into it. Now the first point Candybbug said garnered the most backlash revolved around Linnea, and here's what she had to say in the original video.
Over it. Editing Aurelia here. In the process of making this video, Linnea has been released, and I just have to interject to say, what the fuck were they thinking with this character? I feel like a crazy person because I feel like I'm the only one who doesn't think she's adorable and in fact recognizes her for the creepy freak that she is. First of all, she clearly has absolutely no respect for living things that are not traditionally human. She keeps asking to touch and pet the Melusines as if they are not whole people. It's especially creepy because the Melusines are made to look like children. Having an adult character who is high-key obsessed with them and can't treat them as the people they are was a fucked up move on Hoyo's part. Her trailer is sickening for the same reason. She fantasizes about being rubbed up on by Siegeween, who, again, looks like a child, and Kirita, along with other Melusines and Nekomata. It reads as extremely fetishistic to me, which is a problem when the people that she's fantasizing about look like...
Now, this is a very interesting take on Linnea as a character, and if we indeed looked at the Genshin community side of the discussion, you will quickly realize that this is where a huge portion of the backlash really comes from. And one of the biggest rebuttals people made was that Linnea is autism coded. Now, personally, I don't think whether a character is autism coded or not has much bearing on an argument like this. However, I can still understand why so many people in the community took issues with what Candybbug said. But I don't think it is simply because she was wrong. No, rather, I think she approached the character from an incredibly extreme point of view. And even though we could make the arguments that this is just an anime video game, or point out that Linnea isn't a real person with any agency of her own, I think there's a much more compelling reason why people don't interpret Linnea the same way Candybbug does, and that's is context. The context of the character, the setting she is in, the circumstances surrounding her, the kind of story Genshin is trying to tell, the type of entertainment Genshin Impact is. I mean, I think far too many people underestimate just how important context is when analyzing any character. And to show you what I mean, here's a question. What if we took Linnea exactly as she is, every personality trait, every mannerism, every scene from this trailer, especially this one in particular, and transplanted her into the anime Made in Abyss? An anime whose entire identity revolves around the suffering and abuse of children. What emotion do you think that would evoke within you? Because for me, regardless of how innocent or harmless Linnea may appear, regardless of whether she is autism coded or not, my first reaction wouldn't be that she is cute, it would be fear, it would be disgust. And that is exactly expected, more so because the context surrounding that character has fundamentally changed. And if you've watched Made in Abyss, you probably know exactly what I'm talking about. But in Genshin Impact, it is completely different. People don't look at Linnea or any character in Genshin Impact and immediately think fetishistic or abusive, because that is simply not what Genshin has ever presented presented itself as. That's not the tone of the game, that's not the narrative being told. Neither the world around Linnea or the situation she's placed in are designed to make the audience feel disgust or anything like that. They're rather designed to come across as wholesome, cute, endearing. And really, this isn't unique to Genshin Impact. I mean, that would be like saying that Methodi from Frieren is fetishistic and creepy because she likes giving head pats to smaller girls. Or saying Nami from One Piece is abusive because she beats Luffy black and blue whenever he says something incredibly stupid. I mean, sure, you could make those arguments, but almost no one would take them seriously because everyone understands the intent behind those scenes. They're meant to be cute, they're meant to be funny, and context is what allows the audience to recognize that. The next part that garnered a huge amount of attention and criticism was the discussion surrounding Natlan and Sumeru, with Candybbug specifically saying that she was called racist over some of the things she said about these two regions. Now, before we even get into what she actually said, I think there is something much more frustrating that needs to be addressed. The idea that giving criticism towards certain elements within Natlan or Sumeru somehow gets someone labeled with all these terms, but not the game itself. There's a reason that whenever I've talked about cultural representation in Genshin Impact, I've deliberately narrowed the conversation down to accents. The absolute bare minimum, the least these games can give to bring out some semblance of culture into these regions. Because the moment you spend any real time in these regions, or do even a little bit of research into the cultures they're inspired by, you quickly realize that there are plenty of legitimate criticisms to be made about how they're depicted. I mean, have you ever wondered why Natlan and Sumeru are the only regions in Genshin Impact that mash together so many completely different cultures and traditions into one single nation? Something you don't see in literally any other region. I mean, Mondstadt is primarily German inspired, Lier is Chinese, Inazuma is Japanese, Fontaine is French, Shinezaya is Russian. But when we get into Sumeru and Natlan, the regions inspired by cultures outside Europe and East Asia, the approach suddenly changes. I mean, Sumeru alone pulls inspiration from India, Egypt, Persia, Mesopotamia, Iraq, the Middle East, North America, all within a single nation. And then Natlan brings together inspiration from Mesoamerica, South America, West Africa, East Africa, Oceania, and Polynesia. Again, all within one single nation. And I have to ask the obvious question, why? Why is it that these are the only regions where so many distinct cultures are compressed into one nation? And even more so, why is it that despite drawing inspiration from regions whose population are overwhelmingly darker skinned, the overwhelming majority of playbook characters are still fair skinned? I mean, saying the quiet part out loud, every single one of us understand the realities of the gacha markets. Most of us don't go into these games expecting perfect cultural representation, especially in Genshin Impact. I mean, I certainly don't. And if you do, well, it is a matter of time before you learn. Now, bringing it back to the Candybbug's video, I genuinely find it jarring that someone could be labeled racist for pointing out something that is, at the very least in this instance, objectively observable. Here's what she had to say, not even about Natlan, but rather its Archon, Mavuika.
Wise. Now think about Mavuika in the same way, with regards to her divine ideal, which is war. How does she represent war? Well, she's fighting a war against the Abyss, like everybody else in Teyvat. Yeah, maybe they have it worse than other nations, but still, what happens when the war ends? Which it does at the end of the Archon quest. It's not like Mavuika is some battle-crazed maniac. At most, she's just kind of thoughtless and reckless in her actions. Do you see how war doesn't really work as a divine ideal, and least of all with Mavuika as its representative? Also, it's a nation of war made up of 6 different factions, and yet there's absolutely no conflict between them. It really just doesn't make any sense. This is why I personally always thought it would be cool if the Pyro Archon was a villain to her people. Maybe she makes them fight each other gladiator style for her own entertainment, and then maybe we would have a better rebellion storyline than Inazuma with an Archon.
I think the outrage surrounding Mavuika, at least with respect to this particular point, is extremely performative because she is not wrong. I mean, right now, I don't think it is controversial at all to say that Mavuika is possibly the most boring Archon in Genshin Impact. And the reason for this all comes down to one thing that most of us already understand about her. She is too perfect. I mean, she's righteous enough to completely despise war, despite literally being the god of war. She is farsighted enough to make a plan 500 years in advance and somehow have it play out almost exactly as intended, with little to no course correction along the way. She's an exceptional leader. She learns incredibly quickly. She adapts to every situation. She always seems to be the smartest person in the room and rarely feels like she's genuinely out of her depth. And I think what is most disappointing about Mavuika is that I genuinely don't believe this was the character the game originally intended to build. In fact, there's a single line from another Archon that to me perfectly captures what Mavuika was supposed to be.
The Pyro Archon is a wayward warmongering wretch, and the Geo Archon is a brutish blundering buffoon. How do I know? Because this is written in the epic poems of days gone by.
A wayward, warmongering wretch. Now, that is an interesting way to describe an Archon. And ironically, I think that is exactly the kind of characterization that would have made both Mavuika and Natlan make far more sense. I mean, imagine an impulsive, brash, almost unnerving Archon who genuinely loves battle. An Archon who actually embodies the ideal she represents, war. I mean, every other Archon is allowed to meaningfully express the ideals they stand for. So why is the god of war the one who seems furthest removed from hers? Going forward though, I also think an Archon like that would have solved so many issues people had with Natlan as a whole. I mean, this is supposed to be the nation of war. Yes, one tribe is primarily known for surfing, another is known for dancing. And while individually there is nothing wrong with these ideas, when you step back and look at the nation as a whole, it just doesn't fit the identity that Genshin itself spent years building up. There's a disconnect between what Natlan was sold to us as and what it ultimately became, and I think the major reason for that is Mavuika. And the exact same thing can be said for the points made about Sumeru, specifically the Nefer story. Now, before anyone pretends to misunderstand what is being said here, let us use a little common sense. No one is saying that fair-skinned people can't experience racism. Of course they can. But the reality of the world we have always lived in is that racism disproportionately affects people with darker skin. And even more so, Sumeru's desert, where Nefer grew up in and the story takes place in, is a place that is supposed to represent the setting of darker-skinned people. So if Genshin actually wanted to depict that experience in a meaningful way, wouldn't it have been better to reflect that reality? And yes, I can already imagine the counter-argument. Well, at least Genshin chose to tell this story in the first place. But my rebuttal is very simple. Sometimes it is better not to tell a story at all than to tell it poorly. It's better not to tackle a sensitive subject than to handle it in a way that feels sanitized, watered down, completely disconnected from the reality it is trying to portray. And really, this is a criticism I think applies to Genshin more often than it should, whether it is this storyline or what they did with Ian-san, a character they advertised as the face of Natlan nearly 6 years ago, only for her to end up being one of the most irrelevant playable characters in the entire nation. I mean, what exactly am I supposed to appreciate? Whether we're talking about the nation itself or the characters within it, it is hard not to feel like so much of it was half-assed. Now, moving on to the final point of controversy in Candybbug's video, and that has to do with the female characters in Genshin Impact, specifically how they're dressed and how they're written. And honestly, the community's reaction to this part was probably the most confusing thing I saw throughout this entire discussion. Mostly because this is the conversation the Genshin community itself has been having for a long time. I mean, we saw it all the way back when Laoma was introduced, when people argued that the way she was dressed had absolutely nothing to do with her personality or the way she was portrayed, that it was simply fan service. Or in a more recent example, we saw that same conversation with Sandrone. I mean, people hated the fact that Polonia was removed and replaced with whatever this is. And even more so, they hated that her outfit was changed from a more traditional, fully covered design into the classic body-revealing female Genshin outfits. And if you want an even more recent example, look at the Snezhnaya trailer. I mean, there was an entire discussion across the community about why the female guards had exposed legs, while the male guards were wearing full trousers, or why the Sarita herself was wearing a miniskirt instead of the kind of long regal gown people expect from the ruler of Snezhnaya. These are not new criticisms. The community has been making these arguments for years, and not just about the characters I've mentioned. So why does the criticism suddenly become unacceptable the moment someone outside the community pointed out? And when we move beyond the character designs and start talking about how Genshin writes its female characters, I also think there's a lot of truth in what Candybbug is saying. I mean, take Columbina for example, a character that went from being this mysterious, almost unsettling figure with seemingly limitless potential to, in many ways, feeling like this airhead cutie damsel waiting for the traveler to save her. Or Sandrone, who initially came across as this detached, calculating inventor, the person that made all the Catherines in Genshin Impact, only to end up feeling like yet another tsundere. Then you have Mavuika, as I already pointed out, whose defining trait seems to be that she is simply perfect. Or Citlali, whose personality gradually gets watered down into little more than the jealous girlfriend archetype. I mean, these are criticisms that people have had with Genshin's females writing for a long time. And what makes them stand out even more is that you don't see the same pattern nearly as often with the male cast. I mean, the male characters tend to have far more distinct personalities that vary significantly from one another, rather than falling into the same handful of archetypes. And even when they do fall into similar archetypes, the game still makes sure to put in that one thing in their character that makes them different and memorable. Like take Lohen and Tartaglia for example. Both of them fall into the battle seeker archetype. They both love the thrill of combat. They both possess that mentality of standing before an overwhelming opponent and wanting to overcome them. But despite those similarities, absolutely no one who plays this game would say that these two characters are the same, because there's an important distinction. Tartaglia's love for battle is goal-oriented. This is a character that seeks out powerful opponents because he wants to prove to himself more than anyone else that he can stand toe-to-toe with with the very best. And Lohen, on the other hand, is portrayed as someone who simply revels in battle itself. There's a far more reckless, almost sadistic enjoyment in the act of fighting. There is that easily noticeable difference between these two characters. I mean, even though they share the same foundation, you can very easily have one as your favorite over the other. And the same applies to so many other characters in Genshin Impact. I mean, take Zhongli, Neuvillette, and Capitano, for instance. All three are protectors, all three are guardians who are willing to go above and beyond for the nations they choose to defend. But once again, the similarities only exist in the surface. Zhongli is a passive protector. He believes in stepping back, allowing the younger generation to take the lead while positioning himself as the final line of defense should everything else fail. Neuvillette is the complete opposite, an active protector, the one standing at the front, personally involving himself in affairs of Fontaine and carrying the weight of the people on his shoulders. And then there is Capitano, who is simply nuanced. I mean, this is a character willing to sacrifice his own life for the nation he swore to protect. But at the very same time, he is also a hypocrite. I mean, for all the honor, integrity, the righteousness that he is believed to have in doing that, he still willingly serves the Fatui, an organization responsible for bringing suffering to countless other nations. He's a man who desperately wants to protect his own homeland from evil, yet seems perfectly willing to tolerate an even greater evil being inflicted on everyone else's, and that is what makes him interesting. Again, all three characters share the same core ideas. They're protectors, but they have enough differences in their philosophies, in their methods, in their moral contradictions that you can appreciate each of them individually for the stories they tell. See, when all is said and done, Candybbug made a video expressing her opinions about a video game. Opinions that, in my view, are at absolute worst nuanced. Now, the audience is the audience. People on the internet are going to send hateful messages as long as you don't fully agree with them. They're going to throw insults around. They're going to make threats over something as trivial as a video game. But what genuinely disappointed me was seeing other content creators jump in and contribute to the dog pile. I mean, to me, that is a different kind of low. Now, don't get me wrong, you don't have to agree with someone. You can completely dismantle their arguments if you think they're wrong. But you should still be capable of presenting your opinion without turning another creator into the community's punching bag. And again, I'm not talking about every single creator. I'm sure there are some out there that did just that. But when you become part of the reason someone says they never want to touch Genshin Impact again, when someone becomes so disgusted with the community that they don't even want to engage with the game anymore, all because they make one video that, if you ask me, range from being right to incredibly nuanced, I think that says far more about the state of the community than it does about the creator herself. But that is just my opinion. What do you think? Where do you stand on the entire discussion? Which points do you agree with? Which ones do you disagree with? Let me know in the comments below, and as always, I'll catch you in the next one.